Hi, this is Pat McDonald, your host for Vote for Vermont, where our tagline is listening beyond the sound bites. Joining me tonight is Ben Kinsley, who's the co-producer and co-host. Ben, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Ben is also the executive director for Campaign for Vermont. And a return guest is Robin Chestnut-Tangerman.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be back.
Yes, he's the Progressive House leader. And a new guest, Gonzales, who's the whip for the Progressive House Caucus. I was a whip.
Fantastic.
Great job. I love the title. So Robin was on last year. We had him on the beginning, talking about what priorities the Progressive Party has. And at the end, how do we do? This year we're doing a whole hour show because I'd like to talk about their objectives for what they'd like to accomplish this year, but also I think this is a great opportunity to talk about the Progressive Party. You have an amazing website with all of these, just about every topic that anyone could care about, and it's all laid out as to what they'd like to see in healthcare, education, public safety. I'd like to spend some time really understanding the Progressive Party. If you're up to it, I'm up to it.
Well, I think that's great.
I think that's good. I think so.
And partly because there's so much interest in alternative politics.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Plan B.
Not many people are happy with
to
our
be
mainstream
No,
parties
exactly.
at the moment.
Exactly.
Count me in on that.
Yeah.
So we always ask our guests to talk a little bit about themselves, and you've probably got your speech memorized, but go right ahead.
Not at all. I make it up as I go along.
There you go.
So I am the representative for Rutland-Bennington District. I represent 4 small towns in Rutland County and 1 in Bennington County.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my 2nd term in the House. And in other life, I'm an educator, a builder, a self-employed remodeler, mostly. So lots of experience.
Independent contractor?
Yes.
We have another subject to talk about.
We have done so many shows on independent contractors. So anyway, that's another story. We'll have
It
to
is,
have
and
you on.
it's a complex one. And,
Yeah. Maybe this year you'll fix it.
don't hold your breath.
We've been just as a side note, we've been dealing with this issue as a state since before Pat was running the Department of Labor. Yeah.
Wow.
So this has been one that's been around for quite a while.
We thought we had to fix the
debating.
last year I was there, and turned out not. As you said, don't hold your breath. So anyway, Dan, welcome to the show. And can I talk a little bit about yourself? And
Great.
you're on the legislature.
So I am in my 2nd term as well, and I represent Winooski and a bit of Burlington. And I sit on the House General Committee, so we can talk about that a little more as we go along.
Lots of things go through House General.
Lots
Yes.
of things go through House
Yes,
General.
this is true.
I also do consulting, so on the education side, so I, outside of the State House work, I work with organizations, mostly nonprofits, to look at their educational offerings and increase the effectiveness, as well as infusing diversity and inclusion in what they do.
Cool.
And then I'm finishing up a doctorate degree at UVM in education. So
Wow, that's heavy duty.
yeah.
That's great. Good for you.
thanks. Yeah.
And you get it all done. And you're
I mean,
here.
ish, right?
Yeah. You have to juggle and
Sorta.
Right.
hope you
Right.
catch all the pieces.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah.
So
And I didn't mention, Pat, that I'm on I serve on the Energy and Technology Committee.
that's who I saw.
So-
You were just in a public hearing.
I was.
Yes, I saw you
Yes.
on TV. They have a screen out there. And I
yeah.
went, well, when is he going to finish that if he's going to be here?
So we deal with energy
Yep.
as well as broadband telecommunications and IT.
Yeah. Well, you would have been interested in the show before about Burlington Telecom. That was,
I look forward to watching
well, it
that.
was quite the show.
It was a very interesting show.
I actually
yeah.
thought
Yeah.
they did things that were going to get them sued, so I was glad they were here because they explained some things to me, because I was like, how can you do that? Because I'm used to the RFP process in the state, and it's very rigid, but somehow they were a little bit less rigid in this process, but it worked out at the end.
Well, and I think also what was very interesting there is a very public process, the
Yeah.
wholesale piece of it,
Yeah.
which is why like everyone kind of saw the good, bad, and the ugly.
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
right,
it's not,
exactly.
you know, because it's not like anything happened that was that unusual in terms of selling a business, but it's the fact that it happened in public
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
all this
right.
stuff went down.
Transparency is not pretty, usually.
No.
It's, it's important,
Yeah.
but
Right.
it's but it's not pretty.
Democracy is messy.
Yeah, that's what Kurt says. Democracy is
Yeah.
messy.
Yeah.
But it always
I
comes
think
out okay.
that's like, that should be the tagline for 2017. This is democracy is messy.
So, you were named the head of in your first term?
No, at the start of my second term.
Oh, so second term. I'm like, oh.
Chris Pearson was.
Oh,
was
yes, of
caucus
course, Chris.
chair of the-
Okay, so I'm like, wow, that's impressive.
Well, and Chris was just on Vermont Edition today talking about the marijuana bill.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And Representative Selena Colburn, who's
Selena,
also
yeah.
caucuses with the
So
Progressives.
I just thought maybe we talk about some of the things that you got hit with when you first walked in, speaking of which, the marijuana bill. Where was your party in that issue? And
Well, I think the party was pretty, or members were unified in supporting it. And I think largely because we generally see the war on drugs as both a failed policy and a failed framework. You know, it implies that drugs are something that you can beat into submission as opposed to something that has to be managed.
Right.
Yeah, you actually have that "End the War on Drugs" as one of your taglines under health, I think, on your platform. What does that mean? End the war on drugs? Because it's not. I don't know. What does that war look like? What are we doing right or wrong? Why do you want to end it?
I would say, or if you want to start.
Well, I think when we look at the war on drugs as a national policy, that it has incarcerated African Americans and Latinos specifically, but people of color overall, in disproportionately, extraordinarily high rates. And that's just one of the many really negative consequences of these highly criminalizing drug use, and then having the penalties for that drug use and criminalization so incredibly high that it's devastated communities, it's devastated families. We know that the cost of imprisoning someone is extraordinarily high for each individual, and then also the ripple effects in families and communities when somebody is incarcerated. It has huge economic negative impacts on our country when somebody is incarcerated. And so the war on drugs really is criminalizing and incarcerating at very high rates and disproportionately high rates for people of color. And as progressives,
And lower income.
And lower income.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
And so we really believe that is detrimental as a policy for our nation, and what we can do in Vermont is
Well, and you
address
got
it on that
I think
level.
you've also got to look at like scaling, you know, the punishment with the crime, right? And you're talking about a substance, you know, with marijuana that by pretty much any objective measure is less addictive, less harmful to people's health than alcohol or tobacco products.
Exactly.
That are legal under our current framework. We maybe tried to not legalize them in other instances and then pulled back on that. But you know, it's so much of the effort is going into regulating a substance that's relatively harmless in the whole grand scheme of things.
I had a conversation with a constituent who was a former New York City policeman, and he said to me at one point, you know, please don't legalize pot. And I said, when you were an officer, and you responded to domestic violence or violent assaults, what percentage of those involved alcohol? And he said 95% easily. And I said, and what percent involved marijuana but not alcohol?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, you go up there and do what you need to do.
Well, I know people say
You know.
get rid of alcohol is going nowhere.
Yeah.
It is so embedded in our economy.
Well, it's so much part of our culture.
Yeah,
even
it's
now.
in-
You look
it's
at
in
craft beer
recipes and,
yeah. So you're right. It's not going. And I think you know you could argue marijuana is too. It's such a part of our culture now, regardless of whether or not it's legal,
Right.
that it's not going anywhere. And so I think you're right. At least prohibition on marijuana has been a failed policy. It's almost impossible to enforce, and it's creating all of these side effects that are really not desirable. And so I think then the question becomes, what does legalization look like? And I don't know, did the Progressive Party have a unified understanding of what you wanted to see as a legalization option, or was it just we got to decriminalize?
Well, I think like anything, there's it's steps, and and we move in increments.
Right.
And that really, this first step that, by all accounts, the governor's not going to veto, from what we understand, that's come out of the Senate, of legalizing small personal possession that he won't veto. So that's a great first step.
Right.
It's pretty
It's
amazing.
the DC model,
Yes.
essentially.
And bringing it out of the shadows.
And bringing it
Really.
out of the shadows.
And letting people have some time to understand it, I would think, because if you went to the big commercialization, I think people would have really objected. It's just too much. You can't go from nothing.
Right, and I think that the tax and regulate model, that I think where we will ultimately wind up there, and it has its benefits in terms of quality control,
Right.
Eliminating the black market,
Yep.
those benefits, but it also has the potential downside of marijuana becoming big business.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Well, I think that's why it is, I think, as you said, incremental change is important because, you know, taking this step towards decriminalizing and legalizing personal possession and personal growth, you know, gets at that law enforcement issue that we have under the current system. But there's a whole bunch of other issues that come into light when you look at a tax and regulate model,
Yeah.
and I don't know that any one state has quite nailed that yet. Part of it's probably because they haven't gone through a legislative process. So I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn.
Yeah.
Because Colorado is still struggling with this.
Yes.
What does a system look like, and what are we actually regulating? You
Yes.
know,
and, but it's, even though Colorado is 4 years into it now,
I think so. Yeah.
I find it really difficult to get unbiased information.
Right.
It's
yes.
almost
It's-
impossible.
We've
'cause-
had some
yeah.
people on the show, and it's
Yeah.
it's both sides of the. There's no one clear
Yeah.
yes.
Right.
You know, yes, this is a gateway
It's
drug. No,
working-
it's not.
yeah.
Everybody's back and forth.
It's working great in
Right.
this area. It's working horrible in this area. It's like this whole
Yeah.
all across the map. We don't really have a great understanding of, I think, yet what a good tax and regulate model looks like. I think that's still answers that people are potentially working towards.
And I think that, before we move on from this topic, just really wanting to put it out there too, that we know that like any substance, there are negative consequences to marijuana, and while it has less negative consequences than alcohol, there are still negative consequences, and we really think that by bringing it out of the shadows, it gives us more of an opportunity to manage those negative consequences,
Yeah.
and that and changing it gives us more of an opportunity to change some of the aspects of the ill health around use. So it is across the board, everyone can agree from a public health perspective that smoking and driving is a bad idea.
Right.
However, it's been a cultural accepted thing for people who are marijuana users to drive while they're high. And so that's a huge cultural shift that we need to do.
Right.
Right.
And we really believe that part of what we can do with legalizing small amounts is change these negative aspects of it, and that by not hiding it so much, you have an opportunity to
Right.
talk about it and to move
Do some
move-
education.
To do some education,
Yeah, do
which,
some education.
which when we do have a tax and regulate, we'll have money to do the education that we need, to do the outreach that we need, to fill out this whole thing, what we're doing. So
That's cool, and I think you know like for example, I think the number is it 21 and older? Is that the
Yes.
Yeah.
Because there is some what research is out there on the health effects, the long-term health effects would suggest that you know that kids and teenagers probably shouldn't be using this because of developmental
Yeah.
effects.
right.
And so I think that it is appropriate to have, and same thing with alcohol, right? And one of the
Yeah.
interesting things in this whole debate that you know, something that kind of floated to the surface for me is that when we're talking about you know marijuana being either a gateway drug or there being other drugs out there that people may progress to. There's only one drug that we currently are aware of that you can die as a result of withdrawal, and that's alcohol. And alcohol is still by far the most consumed,
Yeah.
you know,
And the least controversial.
and the least controversial, especially in
Right.
Vermont.
Yeah.
Where, you know,
Exactly.
So it's a really interesting paradigm when
Yeah.
we talk about things like this, I think.
So, do you guys have a set agenda that you want to see happen this year? Because I think you did last year. You had some specific topics that you wanted to see.
There are certainly issues that policies that we'll continue to push for,
Right.
and I would say they're the same ones
The
as
same
last
ones
year.
well.
Yeah.
You know, a livable wage,
Right.
which in this iteration appears to be $15 an hour.
Yep.
But you know, people get stuck on the amount. The goal for us is
Yeah.
Whatever you
affordability,
make,
that you
yeah,
can
be able
to
afford to live.
Right.
Yeah.
Access to health care. And again, we tend to confuse health insurance with health care, talk about them as though
That's
they're
a
the same
very
thing.
good
They're
point.
not the same
Right,
thing.
they're not the
Very
same
good
Not the same
point.
thing. And it is synonymous. So it's interesting because I had just written a blog post on this like 2 weeks ago, looking at affordability and things that are going up this year. And so like property taxes, there's a 9.5 cent increase. There's a 5% increase from Green Mountain Power. You know, but the biggest increase was healthcare premiums by far.
Right.
It wasn't even close. I mean, we're talking about, you know, average Vermonter might see $2,000 out of their pocket more in
Right.
2018, and that's a big number.
And that's with the Green Mountain Care Board holding
And that's
down.
what's- but
the
1,500
increases.
of that 2,000, 1,500 of it is healthcare alone.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's a huge thing, and we haven't really figured out the formula yet to hold prices or hold costs, I should say, not
Well,
prices.
and
but
the fastest
costs.
growing part of that is prescription drugs.
It's
Yeah.
prescription
Right,
drugs,
right.
The federal
which goes,
government
They just
which
give
goes
it
back
away.
cannot act
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
You know.
And that goes back into the opiate thing also. Is are we
Exactly.
over prescribing
Absolutely.
prescription drugs, and what is what are the health consequences of that?
Yes.
You know, and we had a show with Algo Bay back in August, I want to
Yeah.
say, and this was one of the things we talked about because a part of it is federal policy, you know, and using pain as a health indicator, and so you're prescribing to
symptom.
eliminate the symptom of pain.
Right.
And what has that done to medicine?
I think that's a huge change because
Yeah.
we used to accept pain,
Well, that's
some
what I
level
said.
of
This
pain
is a
as
new
as
level of
condition
measurement.
of being
Yeah.
human.
Yeah.
Right.
You know, and now we
Yeah.
expect to be pain-free all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I thought that was really enlightening when he said that, and it's
Yeah.
very
Yeah.
true. First thing they ask you on a scale of 1 to 10,
Right.
you know,
Right.
what's acceptable
The
to
little
you?
smiley
Yeah,
face. or
Yeah.
the-
Yeah.
Exactly.
The
Zero,
grimace. Yeah.
and that's what they work towards. So, but anyway, what else? How involved are you getting on the opiate issue, and any stance on? I mean, how you fix it? I have no idea.
I'm not aware of any particular
Plans.
bill that we're coalescing behind.
Yeah.
I think, you know, in general, I would say that we as a state are making progress in treating it as a broad-based problem with
Right.
broad-based solutions, as opposed to strictly a law enforcement
Right,
issue.
right. Well, it's sure everywhere, so
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
somebody can find the answer and we can steal it.
Well, the
Because-
Opioid Coordination Council report was released this week. The governor had a
Jolinda.
press. Yep, Jolinda and the governor had a
Right,
press conference today on it.
Yeah.
And you know they're working with a lot of different groups to try to address this issue, and it's complicated. We had a show with. You know, Jolinda back in September, October, and this is a huge issue. And one of the things that I've noticed is getting more attention now is the idea of having a job while
absolutely.
you're going through rehab, and how important that is, because it grounds you, and it also connects the family aspect of it. There was someone, one of the advocates was on Channel 3 yesterday talking about how important it is while someone is going through that treatment plan, that treatment program, to have a job, because if they don't, they're dramatically more likely to relapse.
So
Yeah.
a lot of downtime.
Because they have all of this, and they're struggling because they can't provide for their
Right.
family, and so
Yeah.
they turn back to the habit that they're trying to break.
Right.
Well, and I
so
think
down in my area, in Rutland, we have Project Vision,
Yes, right.
which is exactly that broad-based approach, utilizing, you know, law enforcement, the courts, social work, clergy, community outreach,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Community support.
yep, employers,
Yeah.
educators, you know, really making it a community problem, a community solution. And that is getting a lot of traction. I mean, around the country, people
Right.
are
Yeah.
looking to that as a model.
Exactly.
And, you know, it's not a silver bullet. There are no silver bullets, but it seems to hold out.
Essentially, the
Hope.
only one who could really
You know.
change addiction is the person. They really want to take all this. They want to take what's available to them and make it work for them, right? I mean,
If-
see?
With the right supports.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Support.
and I think part of what we forget sometimes is the reason for addiction happening in the first place. And while we can touch on the overprescription of pain medication and the easy access, and really that has a huge contribution, the looking at people's trauma and what folks are trying to escape
It's
from
right, the
Right.
root of
is a
all
really,
this.
really important part. And in that, looking at what's our economic situation. So,
Right.
so many people are using drugs because they are hopeless,
Yeah.
that they're not seeing an economic opportunity for them. They're not seeing a way to have growth. And when we look at the whole U.S. and the change from rural to city focus,
Right.
and that we're dealing with that in Vermont as well. And part of that is how can we assist our rural communities to have vibrant economic development, and that might look different, and it will look different than what it historically has. And
Because it's out in a rural area?
because our global economics are changing,
Yeah.
and so our pastoral life that we have had for so long, it can't sustain itself in the same way that it has.
Yeah.
And so really
Yep.
needing to innovate and to look at our rural life in a different way, that increasing our access to being able to work at home is a huge one.
Yep.
Right.
That there's
Exactly.
so many people who come to Vermont because it's so wonderful here, and needing to be able to do your work by yourself at a computer is something that we need in order to be able to maintain and further develop some of our rural areas.
Yeah.
And we need to have broadband in order to have that be
The
possible.
last mile.
Well, I think it's
Right?
interesting because
It's huge.
we've seen this so much over the last several years. This rub between the traditional rural Vermont lifestyle and I think what it needs to become, and where people are resistant to change, perhaps. But change is coming, and to your point about working from home, there was just a Forbes article in the last couple months that talked about this,
Yeah.
and how some huge multinational companies are moving more towards this model of dispersed workforce,
Right.
because having these high-rise buildings with cubicles and cramming, it's expensive, and it's really, and they're talking like tens of thousands of dollars per employee to maintain this infrastructure, when quite honestly the employees don't want to be there. They'd rather be working from an office at home.
Right.
They'd rather not be living in a city in most cases.
Right.
Not be commuting.
And not be
Yeah.
commuting, and so I think that there's been this. It's historical that there's been this tug between rural and city life, and it goes in cycles, right? And so there's this move towards the cities that happened, like the suburbs that were built after World War II, because all the soldiers came home. They settled near these army bases just outside of the cities, and so we ended up with suburbs, and then everyone was fleeing the cities during the 60s and 70s to get out into and now it's kind of going back, and it's an ebb and flow
Right.
thing. But I think we're going to see in the next couple of years trending back towards that rural, lifestyle, because there's a lot of health benefits to it. There's personal enjoyment,
Yep.
things there. I can go out and, hey, it's nice out today. I'm going to go take my dog for a walk. And then, and it's the internet and the tools that we have available to us now are making that a viable option, where you can.
And increasingly the broadband
Yeah.
Right.
it's necessary for work, but also just as so many aspects of our life move to online,
Right.
and and it becomes necessary for education, for
Yeah.
telemedicine.
Right.
If
That's
you
the
want to
next
save
big
money in
thing. Yeah.
education,
Right.
Yep.
the telecommunication is one of the saving graces.
And these are all changes that
Yeah.
are coming.
Yeah. And I think Vermont is well positioned to capitalize on some of them. I mean, even so CES is going on right now, the Consumer Electronics Show. And there's technologies they're rolling out now that will drastically impact life in a state like Vermont. And things like 5G, which now
Yeah.
gives you fiber optic speed through a wireless connection.
Right.
When we were talking about last mile coverage,
Yep. It's
Yeah.
huge.
there are opportunities there
Yep.
where you can get competitive internet speeds.
So from
How
what I
close are
understand,
we to the broadband last mile thing? Because we've been pushing it. We still have a few last miles.
There's
that-
a- there's always
we
a
have a
few
lot
last
of
miles.
miles. Yeah.
Because the
do.
problem
Yeah.
is, once you get to that last mile, there's a new technology that comes along, and suddenly you have to upgrade.
Well, it's
we-
the terrain
we-
here, which is the
we're
problem.
actually still last mile build out in many cases is still DSL.
Still DSL.
Really? Oh.
We're talking
the-
3.5 megs,
Yeah.
Right,
maybe
or
6 megs.
the bonded,
Yeah.
perhaps, but still
Yeah.
DSL.
Well, and then
Maybe
in
you know.
Burlington, we're talking gigabyte internet speed. And,
Right.
you know, in most other places in the state, we're talking at least 100 megabytes. And
Yeah.
so it's just keeps that threshold keeps moving.
Right. So the threshold for one of the thresholds
Right.
in ranking things is four 1 up, 4 down,
Right.
Oh.
which is barely adequate for
Yeah. You can run
what we do
email
these
off
days.
of that. Maybe with a couple attachments.
Let me just get back to the, just asking you about carbon tax. Is that something we are supporting or not supporting, or?
So we really think that putting a price on the pollution from carbon, and particularly in a very creative offset way to offset the electricity costs, is a great potential for Vermont. That we think, again, the rural city kind of where we are, that,
Right.
that there's a great plan out there that a lot of folks have been working on, business leaders, advocates, and some legislators, to look at how to put a price on carbon pollution that then offsets and is a rebate for electric rates. And so in that, it's all the money is returned, and in this particular plan, there are provisions for low-income folks and rural folks as well, so that it really takes into account our particular location in Vermont and how folks are using different energy needs while moving and supporting people to reduce the amount of energy that they're using, while by fossil fuel-based energy, while increasing the potential to use renewable energy, which our grid is very renewably energy focused, and we have a mandate to increase that.
Right.
And so by offsetting the cost of electric costs, then it's a win-win for so many reasons.
We're going to see that this year, aren't we? The discussion
We'll
of
see
carbon
that.
tax?
We'll see discussion on it.
Yeah, won't go anywhere.
I would predict that there won't be a particular bill that passes.
Right, just a
but
discussion.
In the speaker's welcome address,
Yep.
she talked about wanting each committee to look with a particular focus on how their work can impact carbon pollution and
'Cause
climate
I think
change.
what Vermonters know is that we are such a small state that our carbon footprint and this is my interpretation, that anything we do really won't change much in the bigger scheme of things. While, although people would like to set an example, that the output wouldn't really change too much.
I think that's
I
kind of
don't
like saying other people are mean, so why should
Yeah, so
why should I be nice?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I said we'd like to be. But I think people think, why are we doing this? It doesn't mean a big change in anything.
So actually, I have 2 responses
Okay,
to that. And one is agreeing with you that Vermont's output in, if you look at total carbon
Look at
pollution,
numbers.
it's,
Yeah, if you
it's
look
very
at
small.
Zippo.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of bang for the buck, I would love to see a regional carbon pricing.
Which is what the speaker's been talking about, is
Yes,
a
that
regional
one makes
carbon
sense to me.
pricing system.
As we have the RGGI program, in electricity.
right.
Yep.
So I think there are models that we can look at. It's
Right.
still it's a big lift, but I think I do think it's doable.
Right?
The other piece of that is the Regulatory Assistance Project here in Montpelier consults around the world on
Right.
energy issues. And they have said to us in testimony that when they are in Germany and in China and India advising on renewable energy and
Right.
energy structures, people ask, what's happening in California? Because California is
Big.
Right.
big
Yeah.
and 5th biggest economy in the world,
Yeah, if
something
you
like
took
that.
it out as a country, it would be,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they say, what's happening in Vermont? And they are
They look to us.
they are looking to us for a vision of what's possible.
And
that
Germany
is-
does
that's
have
huge.
a carbon pricing system.
They do.
Do. Many European states do.
Many of them do.
Yeah.
And so what I think is interesting is, because we were talking with Dan Barlow about this, and what they're at VBSR, And some private companies are doing this internally. They're putting an internal pricing
Yeah.
mechanism, like Seventh Generation has an internal pricing mechanism for them and their employees on how to allocate dollars necessarily to carbon, which is a really difficult thing to do to determine what is the impact of of carbon and what is the social cost to
Well,
carbon.
the studies are out there. So the
Yeah.
studies have been done on what is the social cost. So
Yeah.
looking at, you can track asthma, you can track learning disabilities. There's a lot of different health costs that you can track
Well,
for pollution,
right.
and then looking at the infrastructure destruction. That the science is out there for
Right.
how much
Well,
it costs.
it's definitely out there. It's the tricky part is then what's the dollar amount that those social costs
So
are.
that's been done too.
Yeah.
So the Obama administration put out a report that takes into account all that science of here are the costs and what does that mean for per ton. And so
Interesting.
so last year I put in a short form bill that was based on the conservative case for carbon dividends that uses that report and that study to look at it. And it's and it's a bunch of very conservative people that former Reagan and Bush administration that put out this this proposal as a guideline for states across the U.S. to put it in, and they start at $40 per ton.
Per ton. I'll have to
And-
check that out. That's
yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So I think it's interesting. I've said this in terms of lake cleanup too, because we look at state deficits, and then we've got pension fund obligations that are
Right.
unfunded. But the other thing I think about is we've also got unfunded mandates or not mandates, they're unfunded liabilities in our environment, and the lake being a huge one.
Huge.
What is the unfunded liability for deferred
Right.
cleanup on our lake?
Right.
It's
Yeah.
And
huge.
what is that? I mean, we're looking at hundreds of millions of
Yeah.
dollars, easily hundreds of millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And then you look at, okay, so maybe we have a $40 million budget shortfall, or this year we have a $70 million shortfall in the education fund. That's pretty small, even just compared to our lake,
Yeah.
and what the yearly shortfall is there. And the problem is that keeps getting worse.
Right.
It's not like, oh, we've got like a 2.3% interest rate on. That's accelerating, and it gets worse and worse and worse every year, and more expensive to clean up the more that we defer.
And I think historically we've been very lucky in that the negative external, the negative costs of our energy, but also our manufacturing, have been externalized out of the
Yeah.
state.
They're not here.
They're not
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
and so, the lake is
Yeah.
one of the few examples that we have of
Yeah. Internal.
internalizing those usually externalized costs.
Right. Well, and I think we could even say, maybe another good example of this is China. China has externalized most of their carbon footprint. They're not usually the ones that get hit by these large, climate events like the U.S. has been hammered this year with things like the worst hurricane season on record, like hundreds of millions of dollars in damage. California is fighting, it seems like, an endless
Oh my God.
supply of wildfires. You've
Followed
got
by mudslides.
followed by
Yeah, right.
mudslides.
Right.
Because the
And-
trees are all gone.
Because the
Well, it's not just trees.
It's
It's
the ground.
It's
Yeah.
Yeah, the
There's
ground.
no grass.
There's no grass. There's nothing.
There's nothing.
Yeah, it's gone.
It just seems
Yeah.
like and granted, these things, some of these things are happening elsewhere in the world, but it just seems like almost a wake up moment for the U.S. and
I think that it is, and it's a very uncomfortable wake-up moment.
Yeah.
And when we talk about changing our carbon dependency, we're talking about changing deeply ingrained behaviors and beliefs.
Yeah.
It's a sacred right that you can get in your car and drive whenever, wherever you want,
Yeah.
and it's affordable to do that. That's part of our mythology. And we're challenging that, saying there are costs to that.
yeah.
There's got to be some serious education to Vermonters about this whole issue. Because even though I really do believe people think whatever we do isn't going to mean anything. And you have to explain to folks that that's not
Right.
true.
Yeah.
Because that's out there.
Yeah.
You know?
One thing
It
that
is.
really shocked me that I saw recently was a documentary about the Great Barrier Reef. And this in 2016, so we're talking, that's the most recent available data. 70% of the reef died.
Yeah.
70% of the Great Barrier Reef died in 2016.
Right.
And the reason that it's dying at such a fast rate is a 2-degree increase in water temperature.
Right.
2 degrees is enough that coral has such a specific growing temperature that it can thrive in, that 2 degrees is enough to kill it. Which is incredible. You'd never think that, because we think about how diverse our ecosystems are and how resilient they are, but 2 degrees is enough. And it is a very real possibility that people in my generation, not so much my generation, but I guess, but the generation that follows mine, will not know what reefs are, will not get to experience
No, your generation.
coral
I mean,
reefs.
It's
And
Yes.
and it's really a sobering thing when you realize, and then at that level you go, okay, what can we do
Yeah.
that will change, that's going to change course? And aside from, mitigating carbon is
Well,
great, but we need some
need to
sort of
sequester
aggressive
Yep.
carbon recapture
Yeah.
system. That's the only thing that's going to turn it around.
And so there's a couple different ways to recapture, to sequester carbon, and that is through building options and through regenerative agriculture.
Yep.
So our soil holds a ton of carbon.
Yep.
Because really, something that I've kind of recently come to understand more is the carbon cycle, and so we're all of us,
Everything's carbon.
Carbon,
Yeah.
Right.
and so carbon isn't the problem; it's carbon in the released form,
Right.
and not in the physical fixed form. And so, if we use building materials in Vermont, we have access to
Right.
these amazing local materials that are non-toxic, that are good for everyone. We take lumber and we build our buildings with lumber, and we have sequestered carbon. We have kept that in its state and
Right.
not burned it into the
Exactly,
atmosphere.
as opposed to not burning
Yeah.
it. Well, and that's why fossil fuels are such a contributor to carbon pollution because they are very carbon rich.
Yeah.
Oil is about the most condensed form of carbon
Yeah.
that you can get, other than diamond, really.
Yeah,
As soon as
right.
you get into So I think and coal, but that's
Right. But that's the thing. That's
another show.
Right.
Coal's another show.
Deanna mentioned regenerative agriculture, and
Yep.
and somehow we have gotten in this country into a form of agriculture that we consider it normal, that is so dependent on inputs, on pesticides and
Right.
fertilizers, chemically based fertilizers, and you go out to a cornfield and it's sterile. There's
There's nothing else growing there.
there are no worms.
Right.
There's nothing else growing. There's no sequestering of there's no holding water.
Yeah.
There's no biome life going on. It's a sterile environment designed to grow one crop. And we somehow think that that's because it grows that crop, I hesitate to say the word abundantly. At great cost to other things,
Right.
we consider that to be a good thing, and so we really need to relook at what healthy agriculture, even before we get to regenerative,
Right.
just
Healthy.
healthy.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and
that's
even-
where the
even here in
organic
Vermont.
comes in, right? The organic soils have to be healthy,
Yes.
healthier than
Yeah.
the
Crop
the other-
rotation
right.
and all of
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's a really fascinating conversation, and one thing this is reminding me, so New York City's in a lawsuit right now. They just filed, I think last week, a lawsuit against ExxonMobil and 4 other companies. I'm trying to remember, Shell and BP, and there's 2 others, and I'm blanking on what they are, around this question of the cost of carbon, right? And basically, they're suing these companies for damages to the city in rising water levels and other climate-related events because of the basically externalized carbon effect.
Yep.
And it'll be interesting to see if they first of all, how that lawsuit goes, because it's probably going to end up in the Supreme Court.
Right.
If it doesn't end in a settlement. And then what they do with the with the revenues from that. They put it into a recapture system, or what they end up doing with that will be really interesting to follow. I have a feeling that'll probably be a couple of years down the road, but it'll be interesting to see what happens with that.
So what are you guys pushing for the carbon tax bill to look like, or the discussion? Where would you like to see it go?
Well, I think that the Essex plan, which
Yes, we talked
Deanna
about that.
described,
Yes, right,
is an interesting approach.
right.
You know, I don't think it's perfect. We don't know what perfect looks
Right,
like
headed in the
on
right
this.
direction.
Again, incremental.
Incremental,
Right.
Yeah.
But it's, you know, it's the discussion, and it creates a net benefit in terms of we would have the lowest electric prices in New England.
That's an
and that's an
example you
appeal.
said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think another one, there is a bill out there on regenerative agriculture also, isn't
Yes.
there?
There is,
Yeah,
yep.
I think that was started last year, and I think is it still in the House?
Yep, it's still in the House, and so Representative Sheldon from Middlebury is the lead sponsor on that,
Okay.
and she's re-energizing that for this session, and so I think that it just has huge possibilities for assisting farmers to have a good, healthy farming life, as well as doing something that really benefits us all.
So Robin, could you tell us a little bit about what attracted you to the Progressive Party?
Well, I think one of the main things was I have serious problems, as many people do, with the influence of money, big money, in politics. And the Progressive Party has consistently not taken corporate donations, but worked with human scale fundraising, human scale policies, you know, and that really appealed to me. Seemed to me putting the people back in charge, and that was a lot of the
It's a
appeal,
little
as
extra
well as the
work, though,
policy.
doesn't it? Because you really have to reach out to individuals.
You do.
When you're campaigning.
But in my last campaign, I took no PAC money, which was a challenging decision,
Yeah.
but reflected my values.
That's great.
Well, I'm glad to see candidates that do that. I was just talking with James Ellers yesterday, who's running for governor, and he's made a similar decision to not take PAC money or corporate donations,
Right.
which is even more challenging at a statewide level, where you really, it's a lot of it is fundraising, you know. But it's good to see candidates that are putting, their values first, instead of taking corporate donations.
I think it's really important that you walk the walk.
Yeah, I like that. Deanna, could you respond to that question too? Or
Yeah,
give us an
definitely.
opportunity.
And I have similar traction that Robin had to the Progressive Party in terms of a clear statement that not taking corporate money, and particularly in Vermont, the way that we have our ratios between elected officials and constituents, that it makes it very possible to do that. That I'm in a 2-seat district, and still that's 8,000 people, and so that makes it possible for us to connect with a vast majority of our constituents and be accessible to them. And so it's this wonderful way that we don't need to have that outside money.
It reinforces
It reinforces it. It reinforces the
Right.
personal
The need for the
connection.
personal
It
connection.
almost requires
Yeah.
you to go out and talk to
Right.
these people,
Yeah.
Well,
which
it does.
they love.
Yeah, it's the scale of Vermont, particularly Vermont House races at least, is that you can go out and knock on all of your constituents' doors and talk to them at a community level, which is a great thing.
Yeah.
Where you're not as reliant perhaps on hiring staff or doing mailings or
Right.
that type of stuff, which is
Right.
one of the beauties, I think, of our system, here in Vermont, and why it's so special.
It's all local.
It's
Yeah.
all
It's
local.
all local. So, and I know that you are gaining momentum as far as membership and people who are progressives. And I've noticed, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think more younger people seem to be attracted to the Progressive Party. Is it your platform? Is it your taxing policies or whatever that word would be?
I think it's a number of things. One, I would say, is disillusionment with the duopoly of the
Right.
political system. And the other is, it's a very hopeful platform. It's about providing quality education, or ensuring quality education, quality childcare, a quality of life
Right.
that that appeals to not just young people, but
Well, you just
but a
said
lot of
something
people.
very interesting that you noticed about your platform. Could you share that with the audience about how each comment in the platform starts with a very positive?
Right. One of the things I really like about the way the Progressive Party platform is written is that it starts with a statement of principle. Progressives believe this. And then there are 3 to 4 bullet points that follow that. These are the policies that we'll look to enact too. But they're in support of that principle. And so you don't get bogged down in this specific policy. It refers back to this is the goal, the aspiration, and what we'll be working for.
That's great. Dan, you want to add to that a little bit? Just
Well, I think in terms of the increase of attraction to the Progressive Party, specifically in progressive politics in general, I think that with the rise of income inequality, that there are a number of folks who have seen that the current policies for the past 30 years are leaving us where we are today, where we have this incredible income inequality. On the federal level, we have an incredible imbalance of power and folks that are pushing ahead these policies that are undermining our way of life in very radical ways and radically negative ways for the majority of people. And so I think that the culmination of these 30 years of efforts to increase income inequality really has galvanized folks to look for change in politics. And the Progressive Party really is a party that look at bold moves and bold actions, and that's what people are looking for right now.
And again, in contrast to national politics, I would say that the Progressive Party, the platform states right at the beginning, the progressives believe that taxes are how we make our values come true. That is what we use to support our social institutions.
well, you have to explain that to me a little bit further.
So, one of the complaints you hear about, say, Bernie Sanders is he expects everything to be free college, free this. It's not free. There's no free there. We're paying for it, but do we value that? Do we value what we get for our taxes? And so taxes are a tool to achieve the society that we want.
Right. And you look to taxes as progressive taxes rather than, in many cases, it's regressive, where the lower income people pay proportionately more in some cases than people up the higher up the scale.
And so one example of that is the progressive proposal to shift our education funding away from a property tax to reflect a more progressive income tax related tax. It gets murky, and I know my terms sound a little wishy-washy there, but a straight income tax is more variable than a property tax.
More people would be paying into the property tax that way because renters don't, do they?
But presumably the landlords do.
Yeah,
Right,
well, but
right.
not if you do
Right.
income, you get all the
Yes.
people buying into the system rather than.
And the current funding system,
Yeah.
people at the lower end pay a proportionally higher percentage of their income in
right.
property taxes. And to a certain extent, the income sensitivity addresses that. But you still wind up with a situation where lowest income homeowners may be paying 3% of their income in property taxes. And as you get up higher to someone, say, earning $500,000 a year, depending on where they're living, they may be paying 0.5% to 1% of their income in property taxes.
Right, exactly.
So the progressive proposal is through adjustments, why don't we make it more like 2% across the board?
Right.
Except at the very, very highest end where 2% is a large sum.
Right.
But for most people, make it a consistent 2%.
Yeah.
And that proposal actually would not only even the burden out, but it would produce an additional $40 million.
Interesting. So moving everyone to 2% produces an extra $40 million.
Right.
That's interesting. I hadn't seen those numbers. This is something that the House Ways and Means Committee is looking at very closely. It's something I've been following. This discussion around how to restructure our education tax system, because there are clearly issues with it today, and it's not clear to people what they're paying for
Right.
and how their property tax is
Well,
calculated.
with income sensitivity, it's almost there anyway, right? I mean, there's a lot of
2/3.
people
Yeah.
that receive income sensitivity.
2/3 of Vermonters, and it
Yeah.
is 2%. The base amount is 2%.
So where is this proposal in House?
So it's actually sponsored by Senators Polina and Pearson.
Oh, okay.
So
So
starting
it's in the Senate?
Yep.
I think there may be a matching proposal in the House,
Yeah.
but the movement is in the Senate.
That's great. So we were talking about your priorities. What are the policies and platform, which I think I mentioned a little bit earlier, you've really got to check out the Progressive website. It's very good. I
Thank
like
you
it.
for that
No,
plug.
seriously, your platform is so detailed.
Yeah.
And I think it's great. So what are the really key things that you hold on to and hold dear as far as policy and platform?
I think personally, the one that I keep returning to is healthcare and access to healthcare,
Right.
affordability of healthcare. We have I know that time is precious here, but we have a system in which we talk about insurance as healthcare, and healthcare is healthcare. And so
Right.
to me, a system that guarantees universal access to healthcare to everybody, because we wind up paying one way or another. Uninsured people go to the emergency room
Sure.
and get the most expensive
Absolutely.
form of healthcare there is.
Right?
Yeah.
So if we can do primary care, affordable, universal access to affordable primary care, we're already ahead of the game. And then
right.
if we can extend that to everybody, that is one of my dearest goals.
That's great.
Yeah.
Reflected
Deanna,
in
do you
the
want to
Progressive
add your
Party.
thought on that?
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so many things, but right now, one thing that is really popping up for me is around housing, and that one, in the public health realm, housing is sometimes talked about as a vaccine. So if people don't have safe, secure housing, then the healthcare costs are exorbitant, then the
Of course.
education costs are exorbitant. That
It's that ripple effect, right?
That ripple effect. That if you don't have a safe, secure place to live, then it is hard to live your life.
Right.
And that really connects to so many things. So earlier we talked about $15 minimum wage, which there's hearings on right now in the Senate, and that if you don't have enough income, you are not able to afford housing. That we have a public support for housing has been eroded over the past 30 years, and we as a state just bonded for big housing projects that really encompass a large amount of Vermonters. And we also have very old housing stock, and so we really
Right.
need to address that. And housing stock that is very leaky, and so it costs
Right.
a lot,
Yeah.
both
Right.
in terms
For
of
heating and-
climate costs
Yeah,
and heating
right,
costs,
right.
and that low-income Vermonters have a huge energy burden. So the amount of money that they're putting into their heating and in their transportation is very high.
it's huge.
And so all of these things really connected to housing is very powerful.
Right.
And we all need some place to put our head at night.
Right.
And
Safe
if-
place.
Right.
a
Safe
safe
place.
place, a safe
Yeah.
place to put our head at night. And if we don't have the adequate income, or if there's not a place to go, it's a significant problem.
Right.
Well, this is a critically important issue, particularly in Chittenden County, and I know you're from Chittenden County, because business leaders over and over again say we could bring more people here to work if we had housing,
Yeah.
affordable housing
Right.
for them.
Yeah.
And it's so true. And you mentioned how old our housing stock is in Vermont. It's quite old compared to the rest of the country, and it's also tends to be the cheaper housing. So people who are low income get stuck in older housing stock, which is more expensive to maintain. It's less comfortable. It's like you said, is leakier.
They get sick more often.
They get sick
Right.
more often.
They
All
miss
of these
work,
things.
They miss school.
Yeah. All of these
Yeah.
things, and it's a critically. I think both of these issues are critically important.
Yeah, I agree with you. So we have 2 minutes left, and I wanted to ask you, because the governor introduced his budget 2 days ago, a day ago. What did you think?
I thought it was very vague.
That's what I've been reading. The Democrats and I guess the progressives were thinking there were things that were not in there they wanted it to be in there.
One thing that I was completely absent was broadband build-out. which
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and we
developed
just
for us
talked
how
about that,
critical
right?
that
Yeah.
is, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and it struck me, because we were just talking about education, that the governor promised to hold the line on statewide property taxes, which is a difficult thing to do to begin with. But he had no proposals, no specific proposals around how to do that. I mean, we have a $45 million deficit in the education fund, and none of the things that he proposed gets us there.
Right. That's the kind of vagueness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just that one struck me.
Some good sounding things.
Yeah.
But how do you get there?
And at what cost?
And at what cost, right.
So really, he has, he proposed a number of things and with some specific price tags, but did not say how he was going to pay for it. And so if you're not going to raise taxes or fees, then what that means is you're going to cut programs.
Right.
And so right now, what it's looking like as people are diving into that is that it's cutting programs for vulnerable Vermonters,
Right.
which he has said over and over again that he sees his responsibility of protecting vulnerable Vermonters. But if you're taking away, I think it was like 1.3 million or something.
It was for the
Disabled.
people that,
Yeah.
that
Yeah,
I
assist
saw that.
the disabled.
Yeah.
1.39.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see that. We have somebody on our show who has somebody to assist her, just a normal, driving and stuff, and I don't think she'd accomplish half of what she
No,
accomplished
hopefully,
without that service.
Hopefully, there's an explanation for
Yeah.
that one. But
Sure.
and because that struck me too is and I'm all about fully funding our pension funds, but the governor's proposing $20 million to put towards our pension obligations. Where's that money coming from? That's a
Right.
big chunk of change,
Yeah.
even
Big
in
chunk
a
of change,
even in our state budget. That's a lot of
Well,
money.
we have
Where's that
some money
coming from?
from the feds, do we not? 34 million was coming our way
30, I
without
think, was
being
the
marked for anything?
projection.
So
But,
maybe
but
he's,
there are other reductions elsewhere.
Yeah,
and
other reductions
Oh,
elsewhere.
okay.
16
Yeah.
million in coming to human services.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's akin to saying, well, I need a new car, but instead of buying a new car, I'm going to pay down the mortgage.
right.
And so if you had a lot of extra flow to pay down the mortgage, sounds great.
Yeah.
But right now we don't have that.
Well, I
Right.
think we could keep talking forever, but we have run out of time. Sorry. Thank you both for coming on.
Yes.
I appreciate it. Ben, nice to see you again here. And stay tuned. We'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep listening beyond the sound bites.